Now we want to introduce digital identities. This is the topic of our OpenHPI course about digital identities. And the question is who we are in the internet. Of course, with the physical identities, we know how to deal. This is what we do in everyday life. But before we can use a web service in the internet, we have to identify ourselves to the service, because the service needs to be able to recognize who we are, and when we come next time, to remember which permissions we have. As I mentioned, in the physical world, identification is easy. We identify ourselves through our outer appearance, with our physical identity. So people who know us can remember our face, our outer appearance, our voice, and then say, okay, this is Christoph Meinl. But how we can identify ourselves in the internet? To show a photo or a video and to claim this is Christoph Meinl, it's very easy. But for the partner, it's completely unclear whether it's only a photo or whether it's a real identity. So we can't identify ourselves through our physical presence. But what we can do, we can present and identify ourselves by a collection of electronic data. And exactly this is a digital identity, a collection of electronic data. In more detail, of electronic attributes. Such attributes are, for example, our address, our password, our email address, our password ID, our credit card, the telephone number or the account number. So a combination of these data identifies ourselves and forms a digital identity. What we have to do when we want to use a web service, we have to prove that we own such a digital identity, that we own that is our data, this telephone data and this email data and others. So there are numerous ways to provide such a proof. We can prove that we own the digital identity by knowing something, for example, knowing a secret password or knowing a secret PIN. We can prove the ownership by the ownership of something, for example, a smart card or a token. We can prove that we own it, or we can show biometric characteristics, for example, fingerprint or face or iris. But most common and a very simple method is the use of passwords. These are easy to implement, is little effort for the user, but we have to remember the use of passwords for authentication is quite unsecure and holds great dangers. Originally, this approach to prove, to submit such a proof by knowing a password was introduced when the personal computers came up. So to prove to the computer that me and I are allowed to access these and these data. But to use for authentication of a web service, there are many problems and weaknesses, and we will discuss about this. These passwords must be stored in the database of the service. So when we register and we design a password, we have to remember the password and the service has to remember the password. So the service stores the passwords in its customer database, and later on the service is able to verify that this password belongs to us, to verify our digital identity during the login process. In a professional way, the password is not allowed to secured in the database in clear text, but it has to be stored in a hashed form, so that also the people working outside of the service are now able to understand the password itself. There are many attacks known to try to steal the user data. User data are most interesting for cyber criminals, because with this user data they can access a service and can interact with the service under the stolen name. And the possibilities how attackers can attack a service to steal user data, this is by exploiting some software vulnerabilities. This is possible by social engineering. For example, to play that they are an administrator of the service and ask the user to send him or to tell him the password to install something. So the stolen identity data can in many different ways misused, and the idea every time is to assume a digital identity and then interact with the service, use the resources of the services in the name of that identity. This is the field of identity theft. We will discuss in the course more about this. So such identity leaks, here is a short report of a very recent case. Under the name collection number 1 to number 5, records were published on the internet in January 2019 that contained a total of 2.1 billion email addresses with the corresponding passwords in plain text. So these are, of course, identity data, and this is a huge amount of identity data which were published in the internet, and the cyber criminals could take this data and then work with this data. In some cases, the exact services from which the identity data was stolen were specified, so that it becomes very easy for the attacker to misuse an identity for that particular service. And the attackers can quickly test the identity access data for different platforms simply because the users often use the same password for different services. This identity leaks and this identity theft is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous for the persons affected. Reason is their digital identities remain vulnerable as long as the stolen password are valid. So as long they do not change the password, the cyber criminals could misuse the identity in using the service. Here is another case in December 2018. Data and documents of roughly 1,000 politicians and celebrities were published in the internet. And these data include internal and personal documents as well as contact data such as email addresses, the telephone numbers, the post address of the celebrities concerned. And it caused a lot of discussion. How was it possible to, for the cyber criminals to collect such very, very personal data? So the more identity data about a person comes in the hands of the cyber criminals, the more easily these identities can be misused. So it's a real problem, and it's very important to know more about the digital identities, the ways how they can be established, the ways how to manage such identities, and how to use it. So what we want to do in our course in the first week, we will speak in general digital identities, who I am in the internet, and in the first course week we consider how digital identities are defined, and we discuss the different ways to manage such digital identities. So it's the topic of identity management, which is in the center of the first week, and we discuss how to prove that one has a certain digital identity. And these are the discussion of authentication methods we want to do in the first week. And then in the second week, we deal with questions which attacks are known on digital identities, which attacks are possible and how best to protect your digital identity. And in addition, we will look at the problem of weak passwords and give advices on how to choose strong passwords and what influence strong passwords have on possible attacks and how to use this, because the identification by passwords is very common in the internet, and we have to deal with this relatively weak method in a best possible way. So, to introduce the teaching team, my name is Christoph Meine. I am the head of the Hasse-Plattner Institute and run the chair for Internet Technologies and Systems, with research focuses on security engineering, on learning and knowledge engineering, digital education and innovation research. And I am supported by my PhD students, Alexander Mühle and Chris Pelchen. Alexander is working in his research for the thesis on secure identities on peer-to-peer applications with certification process in an international consortium. And Chris Pelchen is working in the field of security engineering, identity on the internet, and has a lot to do with this digital identity theft and our service to inform you about this. So this is the introduction to our new OpenHPI course, Digital Identities. We hope you are interested to learn more about that. We are happy if you stay with us and if you start to interact with the other learners by using our discussion forum, by answering the questions in the quizzes and in the homeworks, and hope also you have fun with the course.